What is the perfect start for your 2026 fantasy football draft? Well, that's what John and I are here to discuss. We're going to break down basically whatever slot that you have in the first round and the player that you drafted at that slot. How would we then attack rounds 2 through 4 to give you the perfect start at every single position? So, John, the way that I've broken this down is it's going through ADP order, but we've kind of clumped a few players together because they're packaged nicely in first round ADP. So 101 and 102 is pretty firmly Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. So if you have, one of those top two picks and you come out of the first round with Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs, how are we then attacking rounds 2, 3, and 4? Of course, it's coming back and you've got two quick picks at that 2-3 turn. Then you've got that fourth round pick as well. If you have Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs, how would you then go about the next three picks in your draft?
So I just, full disclosure, I typically like to have some kind of balance in those first few rounds. If I'm going to kind of punt a position, it's quarterback potentially or tight end. But I want to come out of the first 4 rounds with at least one receiver or at least one running back and then, some balance. So with Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. This is actually, I took Gibbs 101 in my charity league draft. I took at the turn, and it raised some eyebrows, I guess, because I think maybe it was too safe. But this was a bit before the Malik Neighbors, trending up type discussion was happening. And then I have my own issues with the other guy in terms of his availability. So I'm going to talk about 4 players here, and this is I think the safe play is if you're trying to avoid busts. I think George Pickens, Devonta Smith at the turn are 2 really good low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 types that are going to deliver and have a really good chance to deliver for you this year. You can make the case that Malik Neighbors is getting into that range if he's going to be available week 1 and, maybe be 90% and 100% by midseason. Then you could make the case that he, an upside case for him. And you could certainly make an upside case for Rashee Rice. He's coming off of a knee cleanup procedure, has his own off-field issues that I don't know that he's completely out of the woods on the suspension. So I've been a little bit reluctant to rank him super aggressively because if he were, if we knew he were going to be available week 1 and play the entire season, he would be a top 5 or 6 receiver. And so some fantasy managers are okay with that sort of risk. It depends on the format for me. Like if I'm trying to beat 11 other people, I don't necessarily go for that. If I'm trying to go win Scott Fishbowl, I might go for that upside. So that's just sort of how I approach it. I would probably start Pickens and Devonta or, one of those 2 plus Neighbors. If I'm doing it, if I have this decision to make 5 or 6 times, I'm probably going to be mixing things up a bit. But I think Pickens, Devonta are super safe.
If perchance a running back like Derrick Henry or Kenneth Walker were to fall to that 2-3 turn for you there, would you take either one of those and then come out of it with 2 running backs and then one of those wide receivers that you mentioned?
If Walker were there, I'd be maybe intrigued because it seems like he's going to be a 3-down back there for the Kansas City. I've made a lot of money on Derrick Henry. I wouldn't mind him as my RB2, but I don't think I would take him over a receiver or a couple of receivers at this turn. If Trey McBride makes it, I might pull the trigger on a tight end because I do think as you get into the 4-5 turn, DeAndre Swift and Quinshon Judkins are there. And I think they're both really good, mid-range RB2 types that have, low end RB1 upside. So I don't feel the need to necessarily take my second running back, at the 2-3 turn.
Well, that leads in nicely to, a round 4 look. And you can even, dive into round 5 a little bit because you are on that turn at the 4-5. So if you've come out of rounds 1 through 3 with Bijan Gibbs, you've got, say, Pickens and Neighbors or Pickens and Devonta Smith, 2 other wide receivers there. Then how would you attack round 4 and even into round 5 a little bit? You just mentioned the running backs there. Is that how you would then go back to look?
Yeah, I might come back with DeAndre Swift there or Quinshon Judkins. I think Swift feels pretty safe to me as well. RB19, RB15 in the last 2 seasons, RB15 with Ben Johnson there in his first season with the Bears. Seems like he's going later than that at his position. So I think he's a good value there at the 4-5 turn, and really, his workload seems really safe. I think when you get into the 5-6 area, or I'm sorry, 4-5, and you're getting into the 5th round, it's funny because there's a couple Packers I like here. Christian Watson is going 602. And I'm taking him fairly aggressively at the 4-5 turn here, because I know I'm not going to get him at the 6-7 the 6-7. So there's that. There's also Tucker Kraft, who I think is probably worth a pick here in the 5th, but he's going 701. So maybe you're hoping to get him at 610 or 612. So that's sort of my thinking. You've also got Jameson Williams. So those are I'm looking at Jameson Williams, Christian Watson, maybe a Devontae Adams, if I'm thinking about a wide receiver at this turn as well. But I think, Swift, Junkins offers you nice value at running back.
And just to cover all of our bases completely, you mentioned that you would take Kenneth Walker if he fell. So if you started Bijan, Kenneth Walker, and another wide receiver, would you go look at the wide receiver position here? Guys like Luther Burden or Jalen Waddle. You mentioned Devontae Adams and Christian Watson and JMO, of course. So that's the grouping that you would look at for wide receiver if you start 2 running backs.
Yeah, if you can get McConkey, Waddle, maybe McLaurin, Burden. I mean, these guys are probably going to be gone at 412, but Devontae Adams is right there at 412 in terms of his ADP. I am, would be counting on somebody like Christian Watson, Jameson Williams. So those guys younger receivers give you some significant upside here at the 4-5 turn.
Real quick before we jump back in, there are now 3 ways to get 4 for 4 for way less. Sign up at Rebet, a social sportsbook and casino where you deposit $10 with code 4 for 4 and you get our full picks package. All of our fantasy, DFS, and betting content, a $349 value for $10. That is 97% off. Prefer a prediction market like Kalshi? You can do the same on Novig and you get our base sub for $10. That is 75% off. Or just use code YouTube for 25% off any plan at checkout. Links and more details are at 4for4.com/plans, which is also linked down in the description. As we move down the first round a little bit, obviously Jamar Chase seems like the consensus 103. Puka seems like the consensus 104. And then JSN gets thrown in there as more of the consensus 105. So we can discuss kind of these 3 wide receivers in a tier of their own, especially because you're still in this early part of the first round. So then you're going to get somewhat of a quicker turn on the 2-3. How would you then attack rounds 2 and 3 coming off of a hero wide receiver start, so to speak, with Chase, Puka, JSN?
Yeah, and you could pull a trigger here if you are getting a little squirrely at the running back position. Maybe drafting a Derrick Henry or perhaps a Jeremiah Love if you have confidence that he's going to see lead back, bell cow back type touches. Because we're getting into that, after Henry, we're kind of getting into this, well, are they going to see 18, 20 touches per game type backs? So you don't have that necessarily that touch guarantee with some of these guys like Jeremiah Love, Breece Hall, Kyron Williams. Javonte Williams, I think his workload's fairly safe. Josh Jacobs, fairly safe. Those guys are all going in the 3rd round. But what I wrote down here was, Trey McBride going 211. I like him, with a receiver here in the 1st. And then you are looking at, having to shore up running back probably either early in the 3rd. I have Devonta written down, Malik Neighbors written down. So now you're starting wide receiver, tight end, wide receiver, which makes me a little uncomfortable. But Swift being there late 4th, pretty much guaranteed. Judkins maybe being there early 5th. Now you've shored up your running back position pretty well with 2 RB1, RB2 types. And then there's other guys, David Montgomery, Bucky Irving. I know you like Bucky. Jadarian Price, if you get kind of desperate, maybe in the early 5th round to get your second running back. But then there's other options too as you get into the 6th round. Jaylen Warren, available late 6th. Ramondre Stevenson available early 7th. So there are multiple pathways to filling out your running back roster if you did start wide receiver, tight end, wide receiver.
I mean, you basically covered I think everything there. So it's like if you start with McBride, or you get like a Nico or somebody like that, or a Devontae Adams, and you're coming out with 2 wide receivers in the first 3 rounds, that means you're going to have to look for Swift, Judkins, Bucky, Tootin. You could add to that list in there too if you're a Bashaw Tootin guy. It's kind of flipping the Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson start on a little bit, just because you're starting with the wide receivers, so then you get the running backs later. Where if you start with the running backs, you can get the wide receivers later. So I think the ADP works out pretty well for anybody in those first 5 or 6 picks in here, to where, there's a lot of good players at both positions, running back and wide receiver, that in all of those rounds, that you can nicely come out of the first 4 rounds with, 2 of each, or 2-1, and then, that stud tight end, as you mentioned, that you then can fill in somebody else later on down the road at the position that you're shorter at. So I think for me personally, optimally, if I could pick a draft slot, I want somewhere in that first 4 or 5 picks, just because of the fact that ADP falls so cleanly, I think, for those picks. Moving down into the middle of the first, Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor seem like they're the next 2 kind of consensus, 106, 107. So we've got another running back start here, just at a slightly lower level than Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, but we get an earlier selection of players at the 2nd round, and then a later selection of players in the 3rd round. So if you're drafting in the middle and you come out with Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor, how would you then attack the rest of the start of the draft?
Yeah, my first inclination is to start balanced. So Drake London is right there. You could draft Brock Bowers or Trey McBride. I mean, I might be the only one that has McBride still over Bowers, but I don't know. Maybe I'm holding out for no good reason, but I would try to split my exposure to them if I'm drafting them both in the 2nd round, and so that I'm not too wrong either way. But I think they're both great picks. So, you could go with a London or Bowers, and now you're starting off with kind of a balanced look. But the interesting thing about this is if a running back slips to you, a Walker, a Chase Brown, a Marion Hampton, Barkley, and you want to start running back, it's super viable to do that, because the 3rd round you could grab. Malik Neighbors right now is going 306. I don't know how long that'll last, but Chris Olave, it's going to push. If he moves up, it's going to push somebody else down. Chris Olave, Devonta Smith in the mid 3rd. Even a Zay Flowers, Garrett Wilson. Even I'm higher on him than his ADP, which is at 402 right now, because if you go running back, you go receiver in the 3rd. 4th round's a great place for a receiver. Ladd McConkey, Jalen Waddle, Terry McLaurin, Luther Burden going 4.6 to 4.7 to 4.10 or so. And then in the 5th round, you might have a shot at Jameson Williams if you like him. You definitely will have a shot at Christian Watson. So pretty easy to go running back, maybe a Devonta or a Zay Flowers, Ladd McConkey, and a Christian Watson to start your draft that way.
Especially this year, when it seems like all these running backs are really being vaulted up draft boards, and you really feel it. Like when you're doing mock drafts and you get to round 6, 7, 8, you're like, there are no running backs left to take, and you feel like you have to take the wide receivers because they're the value, they're the best players on the board, and so. If you're somebody that started with early wide receiver, then you kind of miss some of the running backs that go on there. You feel like you'd have to reach for the running backs that aren't, projected to be all that good, or there's a lot of questions and maybe they're not all that good, over some other good wide receivers. So I think it's more optimal that you're starting with, maybe even 2 running backs in round 1, round 2. I almost think that that's kind of, in a way, the optimal strategy this year. So having a start with CMC JT, then getting, somebody out of Henry, Walker, Chase Brown, Hampton, Achane, one of those guys in the 2nd, I think gives you a lot more ability to navigate these wide receiver rounds in, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you also get a quarterback somewhere, fill in your tight end somewhere. That start feels really, really easy and good at the end of it when you're looking at your final roster.
Well, the other thing that, just to keep in mind, and, I'm going to be releasing draft day strategery probably Monday. I'm gonna finish it up over the weekend, but there's a guy I want in the 6th round, and it's not a running back. There's a guy I want in the 7th round, and it's like an auto pick, and he's not a running back. There's a guy I want in the 8th round, and it's not a running back. So I don't want to be needing to draft a Jalen Warren or Ramondre Stevenson, Jonathan Brooks at that point in the draft. So it would be very nice to have a couple of, RB1 types in the first 3 or 4 rounds, and then be able to just shore that up with, a JCM or something in the 10th, 9th, 10th round, Jordan Mason, and have, use those guys as my RB3 and kind of do RB3 by committee.
As we now move into the later half of the first round, we find yourself with selections of Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, and Justin Jefferson, kind of this second tier of wide receivers in here. So again, if you start with one of these 3 guys, you got a quick turn coming back into the second round, but then you got a little bit to wait before you get to your 3-4 turn there. So if you start with the wide receiver in the first round, getting Amon-Ra, Lamb, or Jefferson, where would you then turn to for the remainder of the start of your draft?
Yeah, you get into this last, I don't know, not really the last quarter, but bottom half of the round, you start with the receiver. Initially my second round pick that I like, and this is kind of a function of who's going to be available at running back in the late 3rd, early 4th. So I'm kind of penciling myself in for, like a Kyron Williams, Josh Jacobs in the late 3rd. And then I really want in the early 4th, I want Cam Scatterbo. So if I know I can get those 2 types of players in the 3rd, 4th turn or near it, then I might go with, if I have a stud receiver already, I might grab a London or a Bowers there at the start, first 5 picks of the second round, knowing that I can get, because I think I like these running backs at this 3-4 turn a bit more than the receivers. I do like Garrett Wilson. I think he's a good value at 4-2, and I do like the receivers later on in the 4th round. But, if I can get Josh Jacobs and Cam Scatterbo at the 3-4 turn, then I might start receiver in the 1st and 2nd round.
I think you feel similarly to me, but if you were to start that way with 2 wide receivers or a wide receiver and Brock Bowers, and for some reason, you didn't get 2 of your running backs there in the 3-4 turn, I think I'm comfortable taking DeAndre Swift as a break glass in case of emergency running back at the beginning of the 4th round when his ADP is more the 4-5 turn. Are you of the similar mind?
I would agree. I think you're not getting the value. I mean, obviously you're drafting him a little earlier than his ADP, but I think he's safe there. Yeah, for sure.
That allows you then to have that flexibility of what you just mentioned, to where, hey, I don't need to reach for a Jadarian Price, or I need to hope that Ramondre still does what he did last year, or that Brooks takes this, does something this year, and then it allows you to take more wide receivers and quarterbacks in those mid rounds to then fill out the running backs later on, like you just mentioned, by taking DeAndre Swift or Scatterbo or Jacobs.
If you want to draft like a Colston Loveland in the early 4th, then in that you probably would want to come out with a running back out of that 2nd round. And there's a bunch of them there, Barkley, Achane, Hampton, Chase Brown, Kenneth Walker, to pair with your receiver, come back maybe with Josh Jacobs, Colston Loveland in the 4th round. And then you're hitting like Christian Watson in the late 5th. And then you are going to have to kind of shore up your receivers a little bit because you decided to take a tight end early in the 4th.
And there are a lot of running backs in this kind of 1-2 turn, and that's where we're going to end things off here. Now, ADP would say that the first rounders would be James Cook or Ashton Jeanty, but I would also throw in Saquon and Hampton and maybe even Devon Achane. Effectively, you're at the end of your first round and you've selected a running back. How would you then attack the rest of your start of your draft?
Yeah, so I really like the value of Cam Scatterbo in the early 4th. So I'm planning on I want to take him near the 3-4 turn. And if I don't get him, then I'm probably going to get like a Josh Jacobs, and I'm fine with that. So I don't really want to pencil myself into 2 running backs here at the 1-2 turn. So I'm probably going to draft a Drake London, Brock Bowers. And then coming back in the 3rd round, I think Garrett Wilson. You might want to wait. You might want to grab your running back there in the 3rd round, Jacobs or Scatterbo early if you're drafting like 3-11 because you're worried about Scatterbo going on that 3-4 turn. And there are backup receivers that if Garrett Wilson were to go, there's, T. Higgins might fall, Ted McMillan, Ladd McConkey, Jalen Waddle, etc. So there's like more depth there at the receiver position in the fourth round. So, maybe Jeanty, you start Jeanty, you draft London or Bowers, then you come back with Scadaboo or Josh Jacobs at the end of the third, and then Garrett Wilson coming out in the fourth round.
When I had mentioned about with the CMC JT start, that starting with 2 running backs kind of feels, it feels nice. It feels good. I think you like your roster more whenever you come out of your draft, but you would not take 2 running backs here at the end of the first round, assuming that you're penciling in a Cam Scadaboo. Like, would you just double tap, say, James Cook and Chase Brown and just call it a day there and then fill out your wide receivers?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting a bigger leap at, like, if you're looking at Drake London versus Emeka Puka. I think there's a bigger difference there between those two than there is between a Marion Hampton and a Cam Scadaboo, or a Marion Hampton or a Chase Brown and Josh Jacobs. So if you're trying to maximize roster value or points scored, I think that's the smart play, because I just love the value of Scadaboo in the early fourth, Josh Jacobs in the late third, early fourth. So, I mean, that's the route I would go. And I love Drake London. I think he's going a little late. Brock Bowers obviously gives you, or Trey McBride gives you a real weapon at tight end as well.
So that'll wrap up the perfect start to your draft at every single position in the first round. And if you guys are interested, John and I did recently also cover you guys for mid-round targets and late round targets, discussing some of our favorite players to pick in those ranges of your draft as well. So we've got you covered from start to finish. And if you're interested in either one of those videos, then you can click on the screen right over here.